This is just the way things work now. You've seen it, not just once, not just recently. It's one of those things that once you notice it, you realize it's everywhere. Politician walks up to the podium. Could be a rally, could be a press conference, could be a debate. It honestly really doesn't matter. The setting changes, but the performance doesn't. And before they even really start talking, you can already feel what's coming. There's a posture to it. Shoulders squared, chin up. That slight pause before the first line, like they're about to drop something profound. And then it hits. We're not going to take it anymore. Or some version of that. Same energy, different wording. And the crowd reacts immediately. Not because they just heard a detailed policy breakdown, not because some complicated issue just got explained in a way that finally made sense. No, nothing profound. It's because of the feeling. It feels strong. It feels decisive. It feels like somebody just grabbed the situation by the collar and said, I've got this. But here's the thing. Here's the thing that kind of messes with you once you start paying attention to it. If you go back and listen again, and really listen this time, you start to notice something. The louder it gets, the less specific it gets. The more intense it gets, the less detailed it gets. You start hearing a lot of words that sound strong without actually saying much of anything, and yet somehow we still walk away thinking, yeah, that guy's tough. So here's the question I want to sit with today. I just want to sit with it for a second, not rush past it, not answer it too quickly. What if that's not strength? What if that's just performance? Hello all, you're listening to a Friday edition of Back Porch Files from Your Neighbor on the Left, a podcast about liberal politics, human decency, and life on the blue side of America's ideological divide. My name is Don Spielis, your opinionated host. Today, we're going to be talking about toughness. Specifically, toughness where politicians are concerned. But before we even get into the politicians per se, or media or any of that, I want to start with us. Because none of this works unless it works on us first. And I really don't mean that in a judgmental way. I mean that in a very human, very basic, almost automatic way. Think about what tough looks like to you. Not what you think it should look like, not your ideal version, just your gut reaction. What does tough feel like? You're probably picturing confidence, certainty, somebody who doesn't hesitate, somebody who speaks like there's no question in their mind that they're right. And if you're honest, there's probably a little bit of edge to it too. A little bit of intensity, maybe even some anger. Because anger, weirdly, reads as seriousness. Now compare that to someone who walks into the exact same situation and says, all right, this is complicated. There are a few different ways this could go. Same topic, same stakes, completely different energy. And if you're being honest, even if you respect the second person more, you can feel which one lands harder in the moment. That's the shortcut. That's the thing happening under the surface. Confidence feels like competence. Certainty feels like leadership. Dominance feels like control. And when things feel uncertain, when the world feels messy and unpredictable, maybe even a little scary, those signals get amplified. Because now people aren't just looking for answers, they're looking for someone who feels like they've got this, even if they don't. Let me give you a really normal, everyday example. You're in a meeting, it could be work or anything. There's a problem nobody has quite figured out yet. It's complicated. People are talking around it, trying to piece it together. And then someone jumps in, no hesitation, says, "This is what we need to do." They say it like it's obvious, like anyone who doesn't see it just isn't thinking clearly. And you can feel the shift in the room. People lean in, not because they've verified what was said, not because they've weighed the options, because it sounds like control. Now someone else chimes in. "Yeah, I don't know. I think there's a couple of factors we should consider first." And suddenly that sounds weaker. Even if it's smarter, even if it's more accurate, even if it's the only take in the room that's actually grounded in reality. That's the trap. We don't sit there and consciously evaluate toughness like a checklist. We feel it. Loud equals strong. Angry equals serious. Simple equals decisive. And those signals are incredibly easy to fake. And that's the part that should make you pause, because once you realize that, you start to see how performance can step in and replace substance without most people even noticing it. So let's slow this down and really separate two things that tend to get blended together all the time: performance and actual strength, because they are not the same thing. Performance is what you see. It's the delivery, the tone, the posture, the rhythm. It's how something feels when it hits you. Actual strength, well, that's what holds up after the moment passes. It's decision making. It's restraint. It's the ability to sit with complexity instead of flattening it into something simple just so that it sounds good. And here's where it gets tricky. Those two things often look very different. In fact, a lot of the time they look like opposites. Performance is fast and sharp and confident. It feels like momentum. Actual strength is slower, more deliberate. Sometimes it sounds uncertain, not because it is, but because it's exercising some care. It's being careful. And that doesn't land the same way. Let's take this completely out of politics for a second. Think about a doctor. You go in with something serious. One doctor walks in and says, "Don't worry about it. We'll take care of it. No problem." No explanation, no nuance, no details, just confidence. Another doctor walks in and says, "Well, here's what we're looking at. There are a few possibilities. We're going to run some tests and try and figure out the best approach." Which one sounds stronger? The first one, obviously. Which one do you actually trust? Well, if you're smart, the second one. And there it is in the nutshell. That gap. That disconnect between what feels strong and what actually is strong. Now bring that back into politics. Performance gives you the feeling. Actual strength is what gives you results. And the problem is, we are rewarding the feeling, because real strength is often quiet, and quiet doesn't go viral. So once you start seeing that gap between performance and actual strength, something else starts to come into focus. This isn't random. It's not just that some politicians are louder than others or more aggressive than others. There's a pattern to it, a repeatable one. And once you see it as a pattern, you realize it's basically a script, a playbook. And like any playbook, it has moves, reliable ones that get used over and over and over again because they work. Let's walk through them. Not so much like a checklist. Let's actually sit in them for a second and see how they play out. Start with simplification. This one is everywhere. Take something complicated, something with layers and trade-offs and consequences, and compress it into one clean, punchy line. Build the wall. Ban it. Just fix it. Make America great again. The word just is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. It removes friction. It removes complexity. It removes the uncomfortable reality that most problems don't have clean one-step solutions. It makes something messy feel simple and clean. And simple feels strong. Think about how often you've heard that in everyday life, not even from a politician. Somebody's dealing with a complicated situation, work, family, whatever, and someone else just jumps in and says, well, we'll just do this. And part of you knows it's not that simple. Most things never are. But there's something appealing about how easy they make it sound. That's what's happening here, just scaled up. Now, we layer in the next move. Aggression as a substitute for substance. This one is a little more subtle, but again, once you see it, it's hard to unsee. If the explanation isn't there, the tone fills the gap. If the details aren't there, emotion steps in because anger feels like conviction. You've probably experienced this personally. You're arguing with someone and one person starts getting louder, sharper, and more intense. And even if you don't consciously think, well, they must be right, there's nonetheless a shift. You pull back, the dynamic changes, not because the argument got stronger from the other person, but because the delivery got more forceful. That's the same mechanism. It's not about proving something. It's about overwhelming the moment. Then you get certainty over accuracy. This one is huge. Never admit doubt. Never say, I don't know. Never say, we need more information, because uncertainty feels weak. So instead, everything becomes absolute, always. Words like never, everyone, no one. And if you slow down and actually think about that kind of language, it almost never holds up. Reality is messy. There are exceptions. There are gray areas. There are things that depend. But it depends doesn't feel strong, so it gets replaced with certainty. Not because certainty is more accurate, but because it sounds better. Then there is the villain creation machine. This one is essential. You can't perform toughness without something to be tough against. It doesn't work in a vacuum. So the playbook creates an enemy. Sometimes it's immigrants. Sometimes it's the media. Sometimes it's elites or globalists or liberals or whoever fits the narrative. Once you have a them, you automatically have a stage for us versus them. And that dynamic is incredibly powerful. We've all seen it. Because now toughness isn't just about solving a problem. It's about defending something, defending your side. And finally, there is dominance display. This is the part that feels the most theatrical. Interrupting, mocking, talking over the other person, dismissing the other person. Not engaging with the argument, but trying to overpower it. And you see this all the time in debates. Somebody lands a line, something sharp, something cutting. Maybe the crowd reacts. There's a laugh or a cheer, that ooh moment. And it feels like a win. But if you step back and actually look at it, what changed? Did anything get clarified? Did anything get solved? Did someone just land a punchline? That's the playbook. And seeing it as a playbook makes something shift. It stops feeling like strength and starts feeling like what it is: performance. Now, here's where it gets really tempting to say, okay, but people should see through this. And I get that instinct, but it's been shown time and time again that that just isn't how it works. Because this isn't about logic, it's about emotion. When people feel uncertain, they crave certainty. When people feel out of control, they want control. And this performance of toughness offers both. Not real certainty, not real control, but the feeling of it. And that feeling is powerful. Let me put it this way. If you're in a situation where everything feels unstable, economy, politics, whatever, and someone comes along and says, I've got this. Here's what we're going to do. That lands, even if you don't fully understand what it is they're planning to do, none of the details, even if there are no details, because it resolves the discomfort. It replaces uncertainty with something that feels solid. Now layer in something else. Cognitive ease. Simple ideas feel true. Not because they are, but because they're easy. Your brain doesn't have to work as hard to deal with them. Here's a complex issue with multiple trade-offs and long-term consequences. Versus, here's the one thing we're going to do to fix it. Which one sticks? Which one feels satisfying? Exactly. Now you add in the anger. Anger feels like action. It feels like movement. It feels like something is happening even when nothing actually is. You can walk away from an angry speech feeling like progress was made without anything actually changing. Now there's identity. This one's huge. When someone signals, directly or indirectly, I fight for people like you, that hits something deeper. Now it's not just about policy. It's about belonging. It's about being seen. And once that connection is established, a lot of other stuff becomes secondary. So again, this isn't about people being stupid or naive. It's about people responding to signals that are designed to hit them exactly where they live. Now, let's zoom out, because none of this exists in isolation. This is happening inside of a system that rewards it explicitly. Think about what gets attention. A calm, nuanced explanation, that doesn't travel far. It doesn't get clipped. It doesn't get shared. It doesn't get engagement. But conflict, outrage, insults, those spread, and they spread fast. Because they're emotional. And platforms are built to amplify emotion. So the incentives shift. It's not just about being right, it's about being seen. And not just seen, but reacted to, liked, shared, commented on. And once that becomes the goal, the behavior follows. The people who succeed in that environment aren't necessarily the most thoughtful, they're the most performative. The ones who can generate reaction. And once that is the game, everyone starts playing it. If you don't, you disappear. So, up to this point, you could almost treat this like media criticism, messaging, optics, the show. And that's interesting, but it's not dangerous until it stops just being the show. Because campaigning and nowadays governing has performance baked into it. The problem is when that performance doesn't turn off. Because governing is a completely different job. Governing is slow. It's complicated. It's full of trade-offs that nobody's going to love. It requires compromise. It requires admitting that you can't get everything you want. Compromise doesn't look tough. it looks like you're giving something up. So if your entire identity, your entire political brand is built around looking like a tough guy, you run into a problem. You can't pivot. You can't suddenly say, all right, this is more complicated than I made it sound. Because that undercuts the entire performance up to that point. So instead, you have to keep performing, even when you're supposed to be governing. And that's where things start to break. Because now decisions aren't being made based on what works. They're being made based on what looks strong. Think about that. Not what works, what looks strong. Policies get framed not in terms of outcomes, but in terms of optics. Does this make us look tough? Does this make us look like we're winning? Does this make us look like we're in control? And if the answer is yes, then it moves forwards. Even if the actual impact is incomplete or messy or ultimately counterproductive to the actual goal. You also get this refusal to back down, because backing down, even when it's the right thing to do, looks weak. So instead of adjusting, you have to double down. Instead of de-escalating, you escalate. Because escalation looks like strength, and resolution often requires compromise, and compromise doesn't fit the brand that we're talking about. And we should be honest here. This isn't theoretical. As I'm saying these things to you, I haven't mentioned any names, but I'm betting someone's popped into your head. There's more than one politician that leans into this, but I know which one you're thinking of. There is one figure in modern American politics who has taken this dynamic and basically turned it into the entire operating system. Donald Trump didn't invent the performance of toughness. That's been around for a long, long time. But he redefined it. He made it constant. Every interaction, speech, debate, social media post is a dominance display. Nicknames, insults, absolute certainty about things where it's almost virtually impossible to be absolutely certain. There's no visible hesitation, no visible doubt, no moment of let me think about that. Everything is immediate, confident, and forceful. And here's the thing, it works. Not because it's always right. Good grief, it's very, very often not right. And not because it produces the best outcomes or even good outcomes, because it hits the signals that we talked about earlier. Confidence, certainty, dominance. Maybe not to the same degree, maybe not with the same style, but the elements spread. Because in a system that rewards performance, the best performer has a built-in advantage. And this is where we have to stop and really think about the cost, because there is a cost, and it's not abstract. It shows up in the kind of leadership that we've now ended up with. When we reward volume, we get loud leaders. When we reward certainty, we get leaders who refuse to admit uncertainty. When we reward aggression, we get more aggression. And at the same time, we start punishing the opposite traits. Nuance starts to look like weakness. Careful thinking starts to look like indecision. Admitting that you don't know something starts to look like failure. So, what kind of leaders does that produce? Leaders who never say, I was wrong. Leaders who double down on a bad idea instead of adjusting. Leaders who prioritize how something looks over how it actually works. And the consequences ripple out. Policy suffers. Good policy requires nuance and trade-offs and patience. Division increases because performance thrives on conflict, on that us versus them that I mentioned earlier. Trust erodes because when people realize that what felt strong doesn't actually produce results, that gap starts to create frustration. Let me bring this back down to something simple again. Strip away politics again for a moment. Would you rather your doctor be loud or correct? Would you rather your pilot be confident or competent? Would you rather your mechanic sound sure or actually fix your car? It sounds almost ridiculous when you think of it that way, but that's the trade-off that we're making. And when you frame it like that, it's hard not to see how ass backwards it is. So what do you actually do with all this? Because, like I said, once you see it, it's very hard to unsee it. But how do you catch it in the moment? Because that's where it matters. Start simple. When someone is speaking, whether it's a politician or a talking head on cable news, whoever, ask yourself, are they explaining anything or just declaring? Because explanation takes effort. It requires walking you through something. Declaration is simple. It's just saying something with confidence. Are they solving or just blaming? Because solving is complicated. Blaming is lightning fast. Blaming gives you a target, a villain. It gives you a release, but it doesn't actually move anything forward. Are they consistent or just loud? Because consistency requires thought. It requires connecting ideas, making sure things line up. Loudness doesn't require any of that. And here's the big one. Do they ever admit uncertainty? Do they ever say, I don't know? Do they ever say, I was wrong about that? If the answer is no, then it's not strength. It's performance. And here's the simplest test of all. If it sounds like a movie speech, it probably is. Real leadership rarely sounds like a monologue from an action movie. It sounds slower, messier, less satisfying in the moment. But it holds up. Now here's the weird part. Once you start seeing this pattern, you'll see it everywhere, and I mean everywhere. Speeches, interviews, debates, social media posts. You start picking up on the tone, the rhythm, the shortcuts. You hear the just statements. You notice the lack of detail. You see the dominance moves. And it changes how you hear things, which is good. But it's also a little uncomfortable because sometimes it can be coming from people you agree with. Sometimes it's someone making a point that you actually support. And now you have to sit there and think, wait, are they doing it too? Yeah, sometimes they are. Because this isn't confined to one party or one ideology. It's a broader dynamic. Some people lean more into it, as I've stated. Some people build their entire identity around it. But the temptation is there across the board because the incentives are there. So maybe the real takeaway here isn't just recognizing the performance. Maybe it's rethinking what we mean by tough in the first place. Because if tough just means loud or angry or certain, then we're going to keep rewarding performances. But what if we shift that definition? What if toughness is being able to say, I was wrong and I'm going to fix it? Being able to sit with complexity instead of flattening it. Being able to make a decision that won't get applause right now, but will hold up much better later. That doesn't feel as satisfying in the moment. It doesn't get the same reaction, and it certainly doesn't go viral, but it works. And maybe, just maybe, the strongest person in the room is the one who doesn't feel the need to prove it every 5 seconds. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time to download this installment of Back Porch Files from your neighbor on the left. I want to hear from you. I want to hear what you think of this topic and the idea of performance versus real strength, you can go to the website and go to the contacts page. The website is www.neighborontheleft.com. Go to the contacts page and use any of the social media platforms to send a direct message, or you can use the email address that's there and you can send the podcast an email. Again, I'm looking for questions, comments, critiques, compliments, whatever it is that you have to share. I'm interested in hearing it. Also on the website is a web player feature where you can stream or download any episode of the podcast all the way back to the beginning, and a blog section where I post blog posts that mirror the things that I talk about in each episode, including all of the sources that I use for not just the post, but the podcast itself. And these days, knowing the sources is a big deal. I'll be back on Monday with another episode of Your Neighbor on the Left. So between now and then, stay engaged, stay kind, and have the kind of week you'd wish for others.